Welcome back, guys and gals. Matty back again. Today we are going to talk some more backpacking mistakes, and more specifically we're going to talk some safety concerns and comfort concerns for people out on trail. So the stuff we're going to talk about today is going to make life significantly more comfortable and easier for you out on trail, but it's also going to make things a lot more safe for you when you're out on trail on a backpacking trip. So let's start diving into some of these backpacking mistakes. The first mistake we're going to talk about is properly cleaning yourself before you go down to shoot a YouTube video. I have got paint all over my hands and all over my arms. We have been working feverishly hard getting the baby's room painted up and ready to go for when he comes in June. So the first mistake we're going to talk about today is just simply getting yourself cleaned up before you go shoot a YouTube video on backpacking mistakes. The next tip we're going to talk about has to do with LNT, or leave no trace principles. And no, we are not talking about buying a poop trowel and how to properly bury your poop out on a backpacking trip. I feel like we've ranted about that enough recently. We are more specifically talking about stuff like this being left out on trail. I'm sure, like myself, anybody out on backpacking trips has inevitably come across wrappers from granola bars or banana peels or apple cores being left out on trail, and this type of stuff absolutely has to stop. Talking about stuff like plastic wrappers is probably an absolute no-brainer. I'm sure everybody knows that stuff does not belong left on the ground in the backcountry. I've seen people doing it out on trail, just simply pulling a granola bar out of their backpack, eating it, and just tossing the wrapper on the ground. More commonly, what I'm finding is people simply leaving the garbage in the fire pits at the campsites that they're staying at. Now, I'm hoping that the mentality behind this is that the next person coming along is going to have a fire, so they're just going to burn this garbage and no big deal. But where this type of stuff becomes a massive issue is taking into account the areas that you're hiking. Myself personally, I pretty much always hike in grizzly bear, black bear, cougar, wolf territory. We have tons of predatory animals up where I hike, and the absolute last thing that I want is coming into a campsite and finding human garbage in the fire pit that's been sitting there for who knows how long. Could be a day, could be a couple weeks. And all it's done is sat there and provided an attractant for all these wild animals. We all know it's pretty smart to hang your food up in bear country because bears are attracted to smells and you don't want any risk of them coming to your camp. The same thing applies to your garbage when you leave it behind for the next person to deal with when they come into camp. Absolute last thing anybody wants to deal with coming into camp is walking into a campsite, having the fire pit full of garbage, and wild animals are just going to be attracted to that. So if you pack it in, pack it out with you. That also goes for organic waste, stuff like apple cores, banana peels, orange peels. Yes, well, these are organic and they will eventually break down. These do not break down as quickly as you think. And just like I mentioned, the risks of having wild animals attracted to garbage left behind in a fire pit, wild animals are also going to be attracted to organic waste left on the side of a trail. And all you're doing is habituating these animals to human food. And the next thing you know, you've got problem bears, and bears that are not worried about people, and bears that start seeing people as food. And this just creates huge amounts of problems and massive safety concerns for people out hiking these trails. So like I said, if you pack it in, pack it out. The next mistake we're going to talk about has a little bit more to do with group backpacking trips than solo backpacking trips, and that is just simply letting somebody else do all of the planning and all the prep work for the backpacking trip that you're about to go on. Now, I'm sure for most new backpackers, it's probably a lot easier to have somebody a little bit more experienced do the planning and the prep work for the backpacking trip and just kind of tagging along. But this type of mistake does not just apply to newer backpackers. This can affect experienced backpackers as well. I am going to reference a little bit of an experience that a group of my friends had recently. Now, there was a large group trip planned and I wasn't able to attend this trip, but a bunch of my friends did go and joined another group for a backpacking trip. Now, going into this trip, someone from the other group decided to do all the planning and the logistics for this backpacking trip. And the friends of mine that joined in on this trip unfortunately did not do enough of their own planning and enough of their own prep work. And when they got out there on trail, they quickly found out that the trail conditions were significantly more difficult than anticipated. And as is pretty common on group backpacking trips, not everybody hikes at the same pace. So you do tend to get people that get separated from time to time. But what ended up happening on this backpacking trip is essentially you had a group of stronger hikers and a couple less strong hikers and people that were taking a little bit slower. And the stronger hikers just simply stopped waiting for the people that were following behind, and the group ended up getting separated. And they got separated to the point where they actually ended up camping at entirely different spots out there on trail. And unbeknownst to them, a bunch of them ended up walking into fairly heavy avalanche conditions. And thankfully, nothing ended up happening and everybody was able to get off trail safely. And it wasn't until they got home that they realized how much risk and how much danger they had actually put themselves in going out there and following this group that they didn't really know and not doing enough of their own research on the trail. And as I'm talking about this, I hope that you guys don't think I'm trying to throw my friends under the bus. That's not what I'm trying to do here at all. I am the first person to admit my own mistakes and my own faults when I'm out there on trail. And I made an entire separate video on my own backpacking mistakes I made out on trail. And if you guys haven't seen that one, I'll pop it up over here so you guys can go check that out if you guys want to see my own personal mistakes made out on trail. The only reason I bring this up is because it's a good example of letting somebody else do all the trip planning and not doing enough of your own planning and prep for a backpacking trip. The next mistake we're going to talk about is a comfort related mistake. And in the past, I've talked quite a bit on the importance of testing your gear and knowing your gear before you take it out on a backpacking trip. And this advice does not just have to do with your backpacking gear. It's also got to do with some important pieces of your backpacking clothing before you head out on a trip. The clothing we are talking about today is specifically your socks. Probably one of the most important yet overlooked and underappreciated pieces of backpacking clothing when it comes to your backpacking kit. Now, if you go on any backpacking page on Facebook or any forum on Reddit and you start asking about socks for backpacking, you're probably going to see three pretty common brands come up at the top of almost everybody's list, and that's the Darn Toughs, the Smart Wools, and the Injinji toe socks. The reason that these three brands are some of the most popular socks when it comes to hiking and backpacking is not because hikers and backpackers have a massive addiction to just spending fat stacks of cash and buying the most expensive socks out there that they can find. The reason that these are the most popular socks out there is because they simply work. And the easiest way to explain this is another real world example. In 2017, a group of friends and myself did a 9-day backpacking trip of Jasper's North Boundary Trail. It is a 186 kilometer backpacking route. Now, prior to heading out on this backpacking trip, one of my friends decided to pick up a couple new pair of socks. They were some unknown brand from wish.com. And very quickly into this backpacking trip, my friend started to deal with some massive blister issues. And by the end of this trip, the blister on his foot was the size of a loonie. And for those of you who don't know what a loonie is, that's a Canadian $1 coin. It is a little bit larger than a quarter, absolutely massive blister. And what ended up happening was this actually stacked blister on blister on blister. And I think we counted like 6 different layers of blisters by the end of the trip. Getting my buddy through this trip basically resulted in all of us pulling pretty much every moleskin and piece of Leuco tape and medical tape and any other kind of blister aids that we had on us at the time. And we just kind of had to use that to get my buddy through this trip. Your feet and legs are the most important part of a backpacking trip because that's your mode of transportation. That's what gets you where you're gonna go. So absolutely 100% take care of your feet. Don't skip out on socks. Don't go out and buy the cheapest pair of socks that you can. There's a reason why the same type of socks keep getting suggested over and over and over by experienced backpackers. Like I said, it's not because we enjoy spending fat stacks of cash to buy expensive socks. Now, the next mistake we're gonna talk about is very near and dear to my heart because it's got to do with hiking and backpacking with your dogs, and more specifically, hiking and backpacking with your dog off leash. The biggest thing when it comes to hiking and backpacking with your dogs off leash is, first and foremost, knowing whether or not you can legally hike with your dog off leash in the area that you're going to. Now, I don't know all the rules for hiking with your dog off leash down in the States or in other parts of the world, but up here in Canada, in our provincial parks, which are essentially our state parks, and in our national parks, you must keep your dog on leash. We do have a lot of crown land or public land up here in Canada, and depending on area to area, they have different leash laws. A lot of the areas that I go and do my hiking and backpacking in, you are allowed to have your dog off leash, but your dog must be under control at all times. So if you've got a dog that likes to run off and run ahead and doesn't have very good recall, your dog should be on leash all the time. Off-leash dogs running around have been known to trigger the prey drive in bears and cougars and wolves. So having an off-leash dog running around can definitely cause a safety issue and start attracting predatory animals to you. Conversely, off-leash dogs can also cause a disturbance to other animals out on trail, be it deer, elk, squirrels, caribou. I know up here you can face some massive fines if your dogs are disturbing wildlife. Another overlooked aspect of hiking with your dog off leash on trail is other hikers on trail. Being a dog owner myself, I absolutely love dogs, and I'm sure many of you guys and gals love dogs as well. But for every person out there that loves dogs, there are just as many people out there who are not fans of dogs, and there are some people who are downright absolutely terrified of dogs. If your dog is just too friendly for its own good and likes to run off ahead of you on trail, absolutely work on that recall training, or just simply keep your dog on leash. Now, if the mistakes we've talked about today weren't enough and you guys want even more backpacking mistakes, I've done another video on backpacking mistakes and I'll link it up over here. So when you guys are done watching this one, head on over there, check that video out. As always, guys, I am Matty. Thank you guys so dang much for watching. Go Oilers go, and I'll see you guys on the next one.